Hello and welcome to the Gaggle Wobble Challenge. And if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samuely. With me today, of course, is co-founder of the Gaggle, Peter Lavelle. So, Peter, yesterday, Thursday, there was another meeting of the Coalition of the Willing, and it was held in Paris. And it was a hybrid. The media, you picked up the word, it was a hybrid meeting because some people were there physically, including Zelensky, who apparently has a lot of time on his hands. So he was in Paris.
So,
Um,
so the highlight of the meeting, it was in Paris.
it was in
That's it.
Paris, exactly. So
That's it.
it
Okay.
was the
So
base. There was
it's
the base.
downhill from there.
That's right. So then we had people up on the screen, which were very exciting. You see lots of faces on the screen, and then Trump called in to do what Trump usually does, which is to wish everybody well, but without making any specific commitments. Um, Now, what is actually interesting, I mean, this is an ongoing thing, this whole discussion about the robust security guarantees. Um, and more, it just seems like it's just they're talking among themselves really without uh, without really getting anywhere. I mean, it's like a conversation where people are planning something, and then somebody else says something else, and then the conversation segues into something else, and they go back to this, and then it segues into something else. It's just going
And then
on
somebody
and
says,
on and on.
then someone says, when's the next bio break? And is there tea
Yeah,
out? I
that's
mean,
right.
that's the George. I have a question for you. You've already hinted at it, how Trump's approach here. Let's see if we can refine it because I think you're right. Is Trump's approach just not to agree to anything specific? Because that seems to be something kind of overall. And rightly or wrongly, for the better or for the worse, everybody gets to interpret what that means. Because he doesn't seem to want to close the door on anything.
Right.
And I think is that would you say his default position
I
is on?
I think it is. I think he doesn't want to close the door on anything, so keep all his options open. He's also, I think, maybe playing a kind of a long game in that he senses that the Europeans really are never going to come to any kind of an agreement to deploy their forces, so he can just simply wait them out until finally they all come to
So,
the realization it ain't going to happen. They're not going to
so
send any forces to Ukraine.
so he's going to wait them out with them waiting him out.
That's right, exactly. They think they're waiting him out. He's I think waiting them out. So that's why they have these conversations, and none of it is very specific because ultimately, all the time, the coalition of the willing are saying, "Well, yeah, but now we have a commitment from President Trump to do the backstop, or whatever that means." And then Trump kind of vaguely says, "Yeah, well, I might sort of chip in with whatever at some point when needs must or whatever." But it just continues, and the Europeans insist that somehow Trump has made a commitment, while Trump is just having a nice conversation, but he's not. He's made no commitment. And so
Well, how did someone put it? I just read this like an hour ago. Suggestions are not translating into offers.
no, I don't think so. And so here's the story from the BBC on this meeting of and with Macron saying 26 countries are ready to send troops to Ukraine ceasefire. This is totally untrue.
It's not true.
Completely untrue. Because, at most others saying, well, we might send a couple of cooks, to do some catering, whatever. Um, there's been no agreement to send, troops to Ukraine. 26
Well,
countries.
this shows how condescending and how much the BBC looks down on its readers and viewers. The headline. Well, George and I know that a lot of people read the headline, then go to the next story.
Of course.
Okay.
Hmm.
This is propaganda.
Right.
Okay. This is deceitful.
Right. Exactly. That's right. It says 26 Western allies have formally committed, formally. Formally, I mean, formally means something. That means that it's a specific commitment. You put just John Hancock on a piece of paper. Formally committed to deploying troops by land, sea, on air to Ukraine the day after a ceasefire deal is agreed. So this is
Well, okay,
obviously
well, no, what is formally committed here? Did they sign a document?
well. That's what
Was
formal
there
means.
was there a communique or
That's right. That's what formally means. I mean, if you
that's what
formally
formally
commit something,
means?
yeah, that therefore it's going to happen. But this very peculiar. It says the day after a ceasefire deal is agreed. Well, then there's no deal that's been agreed. So how can you commit yourself to something that's an entirely hypothetical? I mean, it's just well, because what kind of a ceasefire deal is agreed? I mean, no, there is no ceasefire. There's no ceasefire deal. We're nowhere near to a ceasefire deal. So what are we even talking about?
We're not going to get a ceasefire deal.
Right. That's right. And then it says security guarantees for Kiev would come into force the moment the guns fell silent, the French leader said. And then after this meeting, however, hopes of a deal to end the fighting have dimmed since the President Putin and President Trump met in Alaska. Prospects of direct talks between Putin and Zelensky look increasingly unlikely, even though Trump believes we're going to get it done. So this kind of reinforces what I was saying is that Trump just wants to keep all these balls up in the air. Oh yeah, I've got to talk to the Europeans, and going to talk to Putin at some point, and then we're going to get this meeting. We'll get this meeting. And I guess that's his mode. I think that's really how he's operated all his life. Just keep promising and then keep kicking the can down the road.
Yeah, because it's a game of hot potato. As soon as it comes his way, he's like, "Well, now you take it."
Right?
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
And if we got 26 countries, well, that potato might not come back for a while. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Okay, I dodged it today. Hopefully it'll stay in the air or in someone else's mitts.
yeah. Um, and so Trump spoke over the phone to Western leaders after Thursday meetings, and Macron said U.S. support for their Reassurance Force would be finalized in the coming days.
Well, it's been being finalized for how long? Months now?
Yeah, but even the BBC says there was no confirmation of direct U.S. involvement, even though Macron said he had no doubt of U.S. willingness to be a part of security guarantees for Ukraine. And now it goes back to the question of what is Macron game here? Because September the 8th, which is next Monday, there's going to be the big vote in the French National Assembly. And there's a good chance that that Macron's newest government will fall. It will, they're planning on budget cuts, and it's an unpopular government, and unpopular governments rarely get their budget cuts through. So both right and left will unite against it, and so it's quite likely that the government will fall. Then I guess Macron names somebody else in another government, and presumably we're going to go through this all over again. So
Well,
I guess this is quite a good way of distracting the French public from the utter hopelessness of the Macron government. I can't even, I've lost count of how many prime ministers he's worked his way through during his
well,
years.
I mean, look at this sentence here. This is amazing stuff. There was no confirmation of direct U.S. involvement, even though Macron said he had no doubt. How can you have that in the same sentence?
You can't.
You can't. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
And George is right. I mean, the okay, I'm going to go through another. I mean, everybody, it's nearly impossible to get rid of the French president.
Yeah,
Okay,
you can't. Yeah, there's no, yeah, yeah, yeah. You can't do it. Short of death, which is, what happened to President Pompidou. But since Pompidou, I don't think any French president has died in office. So he can continue along those lines, and have another prime minister, and then go through this whole thing with um, the next prime minister comes up with budget cuts, and that falls through. What he can't do, I think, is hold another election. I mean, the last election that he called blew up in his face, and if he calls another one, this is going to really blow up in his face. And so I don't think he's going to do
Well,
that.
but there is a way to get rid of him, and it's a part of the great French tradition. Force him to resign. Okay. I mean, he's got on both sides of the traditional spectrum. I
Right.
mean, he's a vile man for all.
It's
Okay.
not, but it's I can't remember who was the last president who was forced to resign. I mean, they
No,
always
no, no, no,
have,
no, no. I agree. I'm not saying it has happened, but I mean, if there's a mechanism to get rid of him outside, beyond death in office and
right.
resignation, is to take the streets.
Yes,
Okay.
they just, but of course these days the police are much more brutal in
Yes.
handling protesters than they were back in the De Gaulle era. I mean, when there was the Paris in 1968, the police were very lax. It was still De Gaulle, but essentially there was no police presence. I mean, it was just people goofing off, having people having a good time on the streets of Paris. That's not going to happen now. You come out to protest these days, and out come the rubber truncheons, out come the rubber bullets, out come the tear gas. We saw what happened during COVID. We saw with the yellow vests how
Yeah.
Macron dealt with the yellow vest. So
How
this
many
is this
people
one is
lost
really
it?
brutal.
How many people lost an eye?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um,
What my point is, George, is that there's so much instability in French politics, and France is just a representative of the instability all across Europe. When this coalition of the willing always makes me chuckle, okay, because it's a very small club and none of us are in it, okay. So it's very, very much a masking of what's really going on. I mean,
right.
what Mertz is saying, I mean, this guy is just he's
So
gone
we'll
loopy.
come to that. I
He's
want I
gone
want to come to
loopy.
especially on Mertz. Yeah. Um, then it says Trump recently indicated that U.S. backing could probably, I like the probably, come in the form of air support. And Zelensky said he had spoken to the U.S. president about maximum protection for Ukraine skies. Kiev had proposed the format for the U.S. to consider. He added. Now the thing is about Trump is that we know his style of speaking. His style of speaking is that he says something and then he goes off on a segue onto something else. So he doesn't really. So anytime you say, "Well, Trump committed himself to this and this," and you say, "Yeah," but then he went off to talk about his favorite subject. Um, and anyway, and so you have Trump also said, um, Trump also said, EU should work with the US to halt imports of Russian oil and gas, to hold Russia's war machine by economic means, according oil and gas, halting to Russia's war economic means, according to an account by the Finnish President Alexander Stubb. So he's saying that he wants oil and gas. Um, uh, Trump hasn't said it, but nonetheless, that was Stubb. And
But let me get this right. Stoop is saying that Trump said,
right, so
"Oh,
Stubb,
I
Stubb,
don't. I'm sorry. I don't believe that.
Stubb was
That's rhetoric that's been coming out of Europe. That's not coming out of the United
right,
States."
right. But I really, I can believe Trump goes on about this. He's been going on about this since forever. I mean, the oil and gas, and he's hitting India with these 50% tariffs. He goes on about how he ended Nord Stream, and then Biden started it up, and how he's been telling the Europeans to get themselves off Russian energy. So this is a perennial thing with him. Um, the problem with if you're going to go down this path is that the countries that in Europe that import Russian oil and gas. I mean, that includes his best friends in Europe, which is namely Hungary and Slovakia. Hungary and Slovakia get their oil directly by the Druzhba pipeline from Russia. And of course, they both get their gas through Turk Stream. So if you do this thing about Russian oil and gas, so as you say, the Europeans say, yeah, 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 we should stop the oil and gas, but the only ones who are getting oil and gas is Hungary and Slovakia, and to a lesser extent, the Czech Republic and Austria.
Well, that's not even to mention that Europe is using at least oil and gas that originated in Russia
Right.
through third parties. So, I
Right.
mean, India, for example, I mean, that's one of the reasons why the Hungarians and the Slovaks think this is just such a double standard. I mean,
Right.
everybody, just because it comes through a pipeline doesn't mean the oil and gas that our neighbors are using, it doesn't come from
Right.
Russia.
That's right. That's right. Um, anyway, so that it would go on, and then here is few countries have openly promised to deploy troops on the ground in Ukraine in the event of a deal, and this is becoming a perennial theme, which is that's that we have these meetings, but there doesn't seem to be a great deal of enthusiasm for deploying troops on the ground in Ukraine in the event of a deal. So remember, there was a lot of hot air, with Macron. Remember a year ago, he was talking about France. Maybe it was more than a year ago, so about 18 months ago, was, well, we're going to deploy troops into Ukraine. Europeans are going to deploy troops in Ukraine. That wasn't even in the event of a deal. That was in the event that, well, we're kind of ready to intervene. We've come a long way from that, so that nobody's even talking about intervening. This is just troops in the event of a deal, and there doesn't seem to be a lot of enthusiasm for that either.
Well, one question that is never posed by these people is that if they're, okay, we'll play along with their fantasy world. A ceasefire comes, okay, and then they deploy some troops here. Well, I mean, they've telegraphed to the Russians what they're going to do. So why would Russia stop its military operation
Right,
if it knows that it's going to have NATO troops
right,
on its border like that
exactly.
in an active military mode?
Right,
Okay.
right.
I mean, don't they understand that, from the Russian side, well, if you're telling us what you're going to do, then what we're going to thwart it and we're going to continue. I mean, it's so self-defeating. I don't understand how they don't see that.
Well, unless that's the plan. The plan is to sabotage any possible deal. So, in
Well,
other words,
I seriously don't see how that helps Ukraine, but anyway.
no, it doesn't help Ukraine, of course, but that they're sending a signal that they want this war to continue because they know, because by telling the Russians, oh, the moment there's a ceasefire, we're going to bring our forces into Ukraine. That acts as an incentive for Russia to continue the war because that's the last thing Russia wants. So if you tell the Russians that's what we're going to do, then what's the incentive for Russia to stop? So you'd have to say that's the intention. The intention is to prevent a ceasefire, to prevent a deal. And you have
Well,
to
I
think
mean,
that that's really the agenda here, which is that the
I,
Europeans do not want a deal.
but at the same time, Russia is saying, well, let these Europeans and the Americans go chase themselves in a circle jerk. We have business to do. We need to attain our war aims here. See, this is why the reason why I brought it up is that these are just parallel conversations. They don't even meet at each other. I
No,
mean,
no, well, that's the thing. I
they
mean,
just have very separate ecosystems.
yeah, but the point is that if they were to serious about ending this the conflict, then they would have to address Russia's concerns. Now they know perfectly well. Russia has said over and over and over again. They've said it just in the past 24 hours. We will not accept any NATO forces in Ukraine. They know this, so they keep repeating it. Yeah, the moment there's a ceasefire, we're going to put NATO forces in Ukraine. So Russia say, okay, fine, no ceasefire. We'll just continue as before. Then you have to think, well, that's probably the goal here. That's what the Europeans want. It doesn't help Ukraine, and so you still have to think about Zelensky, who I think is just simply such a totally useless, ineffectual figure. Obviously, only in it for himself. I mean, he doesn't even have the quality of somebody like Zaluzhny, who's actually a believer. He's a sort of a Banderite. I mean, he actually believes in some of that. I don't think Zelensky believes in anything other
You
than
know, as long as Europe
lining
keeps
his pocket.
exactly. And that has been my overall theory for a long time now. The, what for Zelensky and his clique around him, hey, they're still cutting us checks. So let's just keep it going as
Yeah,
long as the
exactly.
money comes
Yeah,
in.
exactly.
I think that's pure cynicism on their part, but
Yep.
I think that's exactly what they don't believe. I mean, even coming from their own mouths that, they don't believe in victory anymore.
No,
It's a managed defeat
correct.
at best. Okay. Meanwhile, Ursula von der Leyen is, sending like €1 billion a month.
That's right.
Okay.
That's
Hey,
right.
why not? Why
That's
not?
that's
I
right.
mean, the Kiev airport is open. It's open for
No,
business.
that's
He
right.
can
That's
go
a
out.
he continues all his little trips. Paris yesterday. I think he's meeting Robert Fico today. I think so. He's going to Slovakia today. So that's going to be a fun meeting. I don't think it's going to be quite as warm a reception with Fico as it was with Macron. But he's always traveling. There doesn't seem to be an awful lot for him to do in Kiev. Um, and then it says Moscow has made clear that no Western forces should be deployed in Ukraine and has insisted that it should be one of the countries acting as guarantors, an idea rejected by Kiev and its allies, and so on. And then we have Starmer, who his deputy prime minister has just resigned.
Yep.
Not a great loss. I don't think.
Well, you and I didn't know his name, so
Yeah, her name is a woman.
I'm sorry. See, I didn't know.
Yeah, Angela Rayner. And I think one can safely say that the world will remain the same without her as deputy prime minister.
What was it? It was a tax thing, right?
Yeah, unfortunately, it really was very, very trivial, and the sums involved were really very small. I mean, if but the British, once they get obsessed about something, then the size of the swindle, it doesn't really matter. I mean, it's just that somebody was lining his pocket, even by just a few thousand. It just gets everybody worked up, and you're done. I mean, it's just that's it. You're done. Once it may just be 10,000 quid, but you're done. That's because
Yeah, I noticed in British politics that there's a real pile-on effect. Once you stink, everybody goes after you because they all probably stink just as much. So it's
right,
just diverting attention. Yeah.
but also it's one of those things that um, people understand it. If you've diddled the government out of whatever 40,000 quid, which I think is in her case, people understand that. That's the kind of thing that they might have done themselves, and that's why they get angry about it.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm not deputy prime minister. I don't do it. She did it. She should go. And it's always that as long as people can understand what
Yeah.
the scandal is, that's when they
It,
get really
it,
angry about it.
it's like the Diego Garcia scandal of a few weeks ago, where they missed the accounting by a digit. So I don't remember it was so instead of 100 million, it was like 1 billion. And oh, that's just government screw up. But if an individual
Right, right,
is skimming
right,
40,000 pounds, then
right.
well, average people know what
But
40,000 is.
they know exactly. They know what 40,000 pounds is, and it's not unlike what happened with Boris Johnson. The beginning of the end of Boris Johnson began with when he was partying while he was telling everybody else not to party during COVID. So on the face of it, given what a horrible, terrible prime minister he was, it's a venial sin, but people understood it. They understand hypocrisy. You mean you were telling everyone to stay home, not to see anyone, while you were partying with your friends? That's it. Yeah, that gets people riled up, and that was the beginning of the end for Boris Johnson. Um, and so here, turning the situation in Ukraine, the prime minister said Putin could not be trusted as he continued to delay peace talks and simultaneously carry out egregious attacks on Ukraine.
But I thought the UK and his European clown friends want to be at the table. But if you can't trust them, why do you want to sit at the
Well,
table?
that's a strange thing. Exactly. If you can't trust him, then what is the point of these? You said, oh, he's not negotiating, but you said that we can't trust him. So what would be even the point of negotiating? Um, and then this was further underlined by his indiscriminate attacks on Kiev last week. And then he goes on, discussing the latest military planning for the coalition of the willing. The prime minister emphasized that the group had an unbreakable pledge to Ukraine with President Trump's backing, and it was clear they needed to go even further to apply pressure on Putin to secure a cessation of hostilities. Now, this
I
is where
think
I don't get this.
I don't get this. This is Groundhog Day again.
It is, and I don't even understand. You apply pressure, and then you want negotiation. I don't understand. I mean, if you start, applying pressure, you're not going to get negotiations. I mean, that's just that's the way that you apply pressure, then you're going to get a counter pressure. I mean, you're right. It's Groundhog Day. I mean, NATO has been saying this whole same thing over and over again, day in, day out. And so, oh, we've got to apply pressure to get him to the negotiating table. But in any case, even if he were at the negotiating table, we don't trust anything he says. So what is the point of this? And I guess there isn't any point. And I really think that, well, ultimately, these are all politicians, deeply unpopular, and this is a kind of a nice distraction
Yeah.
because they seem to be leaders, men of affairs, dealing with
And I said
weighty
at the very
global
beginning,
issues.
like I said at the very beginning, the highlight of this all was it was in Paris.
Yeah.
That's it.
That's right. That's right. And then the prime minister also welcomed announcements from the coalition of the willing partners to supply long-range missiles to Ukraine to further bolster the country's supplies. Again, how does this help reaching any kind of an agreement? Oh, we're not going to supply long-range
Well,
missiles.
okay, which partners? Who?
I,
Who?
I guess I don't. These are the missiles that are coming from the United States. This is the long-range cruise
Oh, so
missile.
the ones they purchased or
That's right.
whatever.
The ones purchased with American money. I mean, it's like
Yeah.
purchased. Yeah, exactly. Um, Now, here is our good friend Anders Fogh Rasmussen.
Oh,
He
good.
kind of tends to pop up now and then. He's on the Ukrainian payroll,
Yep.
and he's a former NATO Secretary General. He was back in the pre-Stoltenberg. He was
A different era.
a different era, exactly. He says a European deterrence force is a prerequisite for peace in Ukraine. It's prerequisite. Security guarantees backed by American air support must precede any final deal on Russia, or at any final deal, or Russia will simply rest and
I've always found it very curious with these folks is that they feel like they have some kind of privileged position to say what the Americans should do. Okay. Just these kind of, sidekick people. I mean, this is what he is. I mean, he's a paid, hack
right,
right now.
right.
And it's so easy sitting in his air-conditioned office somewhere, how America should use its military power.
Yes,
Okay.
yes,
I've
yes.
always found it very quizzical.
It's very interesting because I think he did that. Um, I think he went to America. I think it was last year,
Yeah, he did a
and
tour. He did a
he did a
tour.
tour precisely to lecture the Americans. That was at the time when the Republicans were holding up Biden's Ukraine package. So he went to Washington to start lecturing and berating them,
Yeah,
American.
Sikorsky did the same thing. Remember that
Right, right. Then they're surprised when Americans kind of tell them, you know where you can shove your foreign policy expertise, like Marjorie Taylor Greene kind of eloquently put it about David Cameron. David Cameron can kiss my ass. I mean that they're surprised by this response, and they said, "Well, we don't like this kind of American vulgarity." But that's the kind of vulgarity you get when you start lecturing them as to how they should spend their own money, how they should spend their
Well,
own
I mean, come
weapons.
on, everyone. Look, this is the headline and the sub text here. I mean, if you want to talk about vulgarity, well, you're looking at it.
Right.
This is political vulgarity.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. And so
Okay,
Rasmussen,
American air support. Okay, we'll dig into that one a little bit. Go
right.
ahead.
When US President Donald Trump declared that he would back a European deterrence force in Ukraine as part of his push for peace, he took a welcome step towards resolving this dilemma of Kiev's post war security requirements.
A welcome step, George.
Welcome, it's welcome. You know, the wonderful condescension.
Welcome, welcome.
Yes. Ukraine cannot accept any deal that fails to provide ironclad security guarantees to ward off a renewed Russian invasion. NATO's Article 5 Mutual Defense Clause remains the most effective and least expensive security guarantee available. However, if Trump does not agree to NATO membership for Ukraine, European allies must provide their own credible commitments.
Well, this is kind of at odds with the preceding slide. I'm sorry,
Yeah,
George.
I think
Okay.
so. But it's very interesting, you know, that because this is you're getting this wing of the European, I don't know, European NATO side, and then you got the other wing. So you got this kind of bluster from the Andesfolk Rasmussen, and you know, so well, you know, we're going to keep going, and then of course we had Ursula von der Leyen. We'll come to Ursula von der Leyen in a minute, but they're the ones who are urging, yeah, got to do it, and of course Kaya Kallas, who the other day said that she was astonished that Russians were claiming to be the victors in World War II.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah,
Wow, she's a bright one. Yeah.
yeah. And then the most important element of any such guarantees must be a well armed European deterrence force on the ground in Ukraine. Well armed. So, well armed European deterrence force on the ground in Ukraine. It could be
Okay, here we go. To do what?
exactly to do what? Um,
It could be stationed behind the lines.
uh,
Okay. I mean, Ukrainians keep, go to your next youngest age cohort. We'll be behind the
we'll
lines.
be behind the list. That's
We're
right.
with you all the way. I
Right,
mean,
but
just
we'll be behind
these
exactly. We'll be
people.
behind the lines. Um, and behind the lines to provide rapid support, the rapid support to Ukrainian forces and serve as a clear signal to Russian. But if you are behind the lines, ready to provide rapid support to Ukrainian forces, you are still a legitimate target. You're still going
Yeah.
to get hit. I mean, however many miles you're going to be behind the lines, if your goal will be to provide support to Ukrainian forces, then you are a legitimate military target.
And so the only line that really matters right here, at least when it comes to ground force, is the border.
Right.
Once you're inside, you're a legitimate target,
Of
and
course.
Russia can hit any part of Ukraine at will.
That's
Okay,
right.
so then that begs the question. So let's say some Italians and some British troops are killed. What are you going to do? Article 5? Well,
Well, that's
it,
interesting.
it, it doesn't count. It doesn't count because you're violating Article 1.
That's right. That's exactly. So they have a problem if that happens. So some Frenchmen and Italians are killed because they know the only thing that they have is to go to the Americans. But the Americans have said, yeah, we said, we might provide some air support. We never said we were going to go to war if, some Frenchmen or Italians get killed. So they don't really have the any kind of a backstop. And I think that's one of the reasons, in fact, I think the main reason why there doesn't seem to be much enthusiasm for this deployment, um, because they know, well, if the Frenchmen or Britons or Italians get shot up, there's not a whole lot the French, the British, or the Italians can do short of going to war with Russia. And I don't think there's any appetite for going to war with Russia. They kind of want to palm this off on the Americans. They just sort of say, "Yo, you do it. You go fight a war on our behalf." But the Americans aren't stupid. They're not going to do this. So that's why this whole thing just becomes this empty talk. You're going to do this. You're going to do that. But ultimately, your only real um, option is if the Americans come in on your behalf, and the Americans are not going to do it.
And without this concrete guarantee of security, Moscow's forces will simply use any future ceasefire as an opportunity to rest and rearm. So I go back to what I asked George earlier. Then why would the Russians stop
No,
now?
they wouldn't. They
They
wouldn't.
wouldn't.
Yeah, they wouldn't. And then here's von der Leyen. You remember we talked about this the other day when she said about the pretty precise plans to send troops to Ukraine, and then she said these are
Before George continues, why is she talking about this?
yes,
It's not part of her purview
it's
whatsoever.
it
I'm
isn't part
sorry,
of.
maybe you were gonna say that.
We're
Okay.
going to talk about that exactly because it isn't part of her purview. But she said there's a clear roadmap for possible deployments. And she says here it will have the full backing of US capabilities. Full backing of US capabilities. You know, strong words. Security guarantees are paramount, absolutely crucial. We have a clear roadmap and we had an agreement in the White House, and this work is going forward very well. And then she says, President Trump, she said capitals were working on plans for a multinational troop deployment and the backstop of the Americans. President Trump reassured us that there will be an American presence as part of the backstop. That was
Yeah.
very clear and repeatedly affirmed. So she's saying things that are patently false.
Yes.
I mean,
Well, I mean, President Trump reassured us that there will be an well, maybe they'll be sending hot meals.
That's right. Now, the German defense minister, Boris Pistorius, has got very angry about this because basically, von der Leyen is talking through her hat. So it
Oh,
says
George, you're
German.
so polite.
Yeah, exactly. This is a family show. Small children are watching, so we got wanted to keep it very family friendly. German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius has sharply criticized reported comments by Ursula von der Leyen. Pistorius said that he strongly believed it was wrong to discuss such topics before sitting at the negotiating table with Kiev or Moscow. And he says, apart from the fact that the European Union has no jurisdiction or competence whatsoever when it comes to the deployment of troops, regardless of for whom or for what, I would be very cautious about confirming or commenting on such considerations in any way. So he's talking about this a fellow German, and he said, what the hell are you on about? You're talking about that these plans are precise. Everything has already been mapped out. We're already everything's all set to go. And particularly when it's clear, and we'll see this in a minute, that the Germans are not at all enthusiastic about this idea. And he says the German defense minister added that there were ongoing deliberations about what might be possible, what might not be possible, and under what conditions and reservations something could even be conceivable. Well, that doesn't
Well,
sound.
I would say there's a little hesitation in that tone,
Yeah,
George.
exactly. That doesn't sound pretty precise. I mean, to be honest, can you get any vaguer than that? Um, However, he said discussing this publicly at the current time was completely wrong, in a rare rebuke for von der Leyen from the EU's biggest economy. So it's a rare rebuke. Um, and
Well, among Germans.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, Germans, they tend to be quite polite among themselves. Yeah. And then we have Schmerz, who called Putin a war criminal. So he's off with the sort of the Macron. He's
Yeah.
an ogre and cannibal and whatever else he is, predator. and he said he's a war criminal, and Macron said that Putin might be one of the worst war criminals of our era. That is now plain to see. We must be clear on how to deal with war criminals. There is no room for leniency. What do you think he means by that? There is no room for leniency. What does that mean? You're going
Well,
to
well, given the West has this new passion for decapitation and assassination,
good,
I think we get that it includes that. Okay.
right?
I mean, this is so counterproductive. Okay. But they all agree with Trump's overtures of peace. Well, what do you, the German chancellor, I mean, how do you
I know
square
it's very funny.
circle here?
You're absolutely right. They all say this. Everything, every time they open their mouths, they preface everything by, "We thoroughly support what President Trump is doing. President Trump has opened pathways to peace, and we're absolutely on board for that." And then they go off, with all of this, totally insincere. But oh yeah,
Oh yeah, well, I guess because the new jobs report just came out, the new inflation report came out, immigration is up. So let's call someone a war criminal.
it's a war criminal.
Okay,
Um,
and and Germany is a laggard among the cowards of Europe, talking about Gaza. So I
but
mean,
okay, yeah,
but Merz wants to talk about a lot. There's a
right.
lot of things he doesn't want to talk about right now.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. It was very interesting with the Germans, when it comes to Israel, because they just make stuff up. It's like, oh, well, we have this special relationship because of World War II, because of Israel. It's a special relationship. We can't criticize Israel because of World War II. This is just completely made up. Germans had no problems criticizing Israel in the 1970s and 80s. Helmut Schmidt used to criticize Israel on a regular basis. He didn't say, well, we're going to go easy. This is just completely made up by the current German political elite, that somehow Germany has a special obligation to support Israeli crimes because of what happened in World War II. I mean,
Well,
total nonsense.
but the Germany of today is not the Germany of then. So I mean,
Of course not. And as I say, the Germans in the 1970s didn't have any problems. Even then, they didn't say, "Hey, we can't possibly criticize Israel because of what happened in the 1930s and 40s." I mean, it's a stupid argument, and they didn't say that's what the Germans are doing now is just presenting stupid arguments, essentially to justify. I don't know why they're doing it. I don't exactly know why they're so on board for Israel. I mean, I don't know what Israel does for Germany,
well, I mean,
but
who knows? I mean, when it comes to um, armaments, Germany's number two for the
well,
Israelis. So
yeah,
the American aid goes to Israel. Israel buys German arms.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah. Now, when he says we must be clear on how to deal with war criminals, there is no room for leniency, he sounds like Annalena Baerbock, because Baerbock used to talk like this, and it always sounded as if Baerbock wanted to send, the German Panzer Corps straight to Moscow to arrest Putin and take him to the Hague. I mean, that's what Annalena Baerbock sounded like. I mean, so it sounds like Merz is echoing the Baerbock talking points.
Yeah, but that's in juxtaposition. I remember it was in the summer of 1991. I lived in Berlin, attempted to learn German, and the biggest museum exhibition of the summer in their largest venue was the war against the Soviet Union, and it was what Nazi Germany did
Yeah.
to the Soviet Union. It was. Well, you couldn't put it on YouTube. Let's put it that way. It was really graphic and it
But you
was
see, that's
really,
right. But you see, that's very, very interesting, because you're absolutely right. That's what the Germans were taught. That's how the Germans used to talk. But it was always insincere. I think the Germans were very, very opportunistic,
there you go. There you go.
because from the 1960s on, the 1960s,
Yeah.
up until the 1960s, the Germans were very anti-Soviet, absolutely anti-Soviet. Then they kind of figured out, particularly after the Berlin crisis, that there's a limit to what we can get from the Americans. The Americans did nothing when the Soviets built the wall. They thought the Americans would do something, they didn't, and then they switched their policy. And that was the genesis of the whole Ostpolitik. And the Germans kind of figured out that if anything was going to change in Germany, if there was any prospect at all for some form of reunification, then the road to reunification lay in Moscow. It wasn't Washington. And then Germany just abruptly switched. And suddenly they was always speaking favorably about the Soviet Union. You never said anything critical about East Germany, which is very different from what it used to be, because they realized then that this is, if we want to get anything, we have to act in a very, very nice, warm, friendly way to the Soviet Union. So that, the museums and everything else is all part of that. Insincere, but that was what they were doing.
So that begs the question. So we have Annalena Baerbock, who, the family does count when it comes to politics
Right.
often, okay? And Merz is in the same situation. So it really begs the question, and George has already answered it, they're very insincere,
Yep.
okay?
Yep.
And now these are people that never lived through these events, obviously. They more than lament that they were clobbered,
Right.
just obliterated.
Right.
So really, where does that come from? So you want round three because you think you could have the Americans with you? Well, George is right. When the Berlin Wall went up, what did the Americans do?
That's
Nothing.
they didn't do anything, and that caused the major change. That was a psychological blow for them, and they realized we can't rely on the Americans. We have to make nice all the years of the 1950s, of the Adenauer and this very harsh, very anti-Soviet policy. They realized that's a waste
Very.
of time. This isn't going to get us anywhere. We have to make nice with
Well,
Moscow.
George, it's just something that I've been bringing up off and on for years now, and I think it's more valid now than ever before. Is we have a huge German question here,
Right.
okay?
Right.
And that has really been the crucible of European security because how to deal with the rise of Germany. Now Germany it rose, it collapsed, it has come back, but as a client state of the
Right.
United States,
Right.
okay, and we've seen the same thing happen with Russia. Russia excluded the Soviet
Right.
Union, excluded from European security architecture. Then we have after the war, we have a new paradigm, still isolating the Soviet
Right.
Union.
Right.
And now all of that has come to pass. And now we still have what to do with Germany and Europe. And Russia is the new enemy again. I mean, these patterns.
Well, it is a pattern, and I think it's very interesting because the Germans um, have figured out, and this is a perennial problem for the Germans, is that we cannot get isolated. It goes back to Bismarck. Bismarck said there's a great danger. We're a great power in the middle of Europe, and we could very easily become isolated because all our neighbors are afraid of us, and they're going to unite against us. So we must never allow our neighbors to unite against us. And so when he famously said, in any grouping of five great powers, Germany has to be with the three against the two. Um, and of course, World War One, Germany is isolated. Um, and Hitler, he was very smart. I mean, Hitler kind of tried to figure out some way in which he could wage a war against the Soviet Union in alliance with others, not to do it by himself, but it failed. Even though Germany was isolated, we have the same kind of problem. Still, this animus towards the Russians that hasn't changed. What has changed is how Germany is playing this role of being in an alliance, being a part of a coalition, and always keep in with the Americans, keep in with the French, keep in with the British. That's what matters. And of course, keep in with Israel because that gets into the Jews, the power of the Jews, the money and everything. So you want to always don't go against them. Don't go against the Jews. Big mistake by Hitler. They're a powerful grouping. So you can see how they're thinking. The objectives haven't changed. The hatred, this obsessive hatred for the Russians hasn't changed. It's merely that their tactics have altered. But they failed previously, and they did get themselves isolated. So it may all blow up in their faces again.
And again, the repetition can be extended because in the time that I've lived here, it was only it only started 3.5 years ago because of Ukraine. Hearing negative things about Germany and Germans. That was something I never heard.
Right,
If there was criticism, they would say the fascists, the
right,
Hitlerites. That's what they very specific language, very
right.
specific, because they made a delineation. That was then.
Yep,
And and there was an appreciation for at
right.
least German things, not
Yep,
German culture, because it doesn't really export it anymore. But I mean, that has changed,
yep,
George.
yep,
It's changed a lot.
yep, yep.
And so we have this cycle because people like Mertz and like Baerbock, they don't comprehend that what you sow is what you're going to
Right.
reap because it's coming back at them now.
It's coming back at them, but they're, I think, figuring that we are in the big coalition. We're not isolated, and so therefore, okay, the Russians can come back at us, but hey, look, we're surrounded by friends. So what there's
Well,
what you do.
that would explain the demure reaction to the destruction of Nord Stream because we've chosen a side. Actually, they forced us to
Right.
choose a
That's right.
side.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. That's the force of the issue, which is in all circumstances. Keep in with the Americans. Because the moment you do that, the moment the Germans, I think, figure out if we have a falling out with the Americans, then we've got problems on our hands. Because now we're falling out with the Americans and we're falling out with the Russians. And then the perennial German nightmare reappears, which is we're going to be isolated. And that's why they just, even this humiliation, when Sergeant Schultz stood there as Biden humiliated him in public, said nothing, because they have at all times keep in with the Americans. And I think that's part of it also, as I said, that's a slightly different issue, which is Israel. Never, never, never go against these people. These are very powerful and they exert a lot of influence. Big mistake by Hitler to take on the world Jewry. That
Well, yeah,
didn't work to hit Germany's
and
advantage.
just that historical um, meme is too light, but that narrative, the Germans are uniquely vulnerable on, uniquely.
Right,
So
right.
they feel that weakness.
Yes.
But George, but if it's repeating and it's never really worked for them, so what are we in for?
Well, I think that
Anyway, the caveat here is that there there isn't a full-throated American support for all of this,
no, there isn't. There
and
isn't.
that's the quandary they're all in.
But it's an interesting because of course there is the alternative, and some Germans did pursue that alternative, which is to maintain good relations with Russia. That goes back to the Bismarck era, with the Dreikaiserbund. It goes back to the 1920s during the sort of the Bolshevik and cooperation with the German military. So there have been eras, and then also goes to the Ostpolitik era. There have been these eras in which Germany and Russia were friends. But it never seems to last. It somehow there's this something always turns up, and and it nearly always on the part of the Germans. It's the Germans who then
I was going to
yeah.
say that,
It's never the Russians. It's always the Germans
it's so
break off their
interesting.
friendship.
Starmer says you can't trust the Russians. Well, the West backstabs Russia far more often. Okay,
Right,
they're the ones that welch on their word.
right. That's right. That's right. So
Sorry for the digression, everyone. Keep going, George.
so Schmerz, and then accepting that the war was unlikely to be won on the battlefield, Merz said that he saw potential in weakening the Russian economy and voiced his support for the imposition of tariffs on any country that continued to trade with
But
Russia.
here we go. See, George and I have been chronicling all this. Is the Russians have already lost. The Russians are
Right.
losing. Okay. They're using chips from washing machines.
That's
Okay.
right.
Russia is isolated on the international stage. We go through these waves, and now here we go. Here's the newest one.
That's
The
right.
newest one. It won't be won on the battlefield. Yes, it will be decided on the battlefield. There's ample evidence that's going to be the case. But now it's like we weaken the Russian economy. Okay,
Right.
what it is that okay, sanctions didn't work, so they don't talk about that very
Right.
much more.
Right.
I mean, when they say like this is the 19th round, the
Right.
joke is on them.
Right. Right. But this is very interesting also. I mean, if he says imposition of tariffs on any country that continues to trade with Russia, if Germany pursues that policy, that's you're really going to be cutting yourself off from much of the world. So then you'd have to say, is that the German plan
An
to to to
export-driven economy.
yeah, exactly, because Germany is an export-driven economy. Germany is like China. It's an export-driven economy, which means that there's a limit to how far you can go with waging trade wars because you are totally dependent on other countries importing your goods. So if Germany is planning on this, hitting India and hitting China, I think Germany is suddenly going to find, its export markets, vanishing. Um, so maybe he thinks it's just the Americans, or that somehow all the Americans, or meanwhile we Europeans will continue to do business with India and China just as before. But
Hey,
the Americans aren't going to tolerate that. The Americans aren't, if the Americans are really going to go down this path of hitting India and China with these massive tariffs because they're importing fossil fuels, they're going to insist the Europeans do the same. They're not going to say, okay, well, but you can go on picking up the slack. I mean, the Americans will say, no, we all have to impose these tariffs.
wow. It's a trading country, George.
It's an export-driven economy. It has, it's very vulnerable to any kind of economic downturns. It's not it's not an autarkic economy. But then he
You
says,
never, George and I coming up, we never would have agreed with the label, the Germans are risk takers. George would say, no, 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 they're not. Okay,
right, right, right,
they're not. This is,
right.
this is roulette.
That's right. That's right. That's why you have to wonder whether Schmerz will survive in Germany. He seems to be exactly a risk taker, which I don't think is where the Germans are. Um, anyway, so the German chancellor once again ruled out sending German troops to Ukraine before a ceasefire came into effect, adding that he was currently more concerned about the state of Ukraine now that he was about his future, noting anyway that Putin had no interest in pursuing either a ceasefire or a peace agreement with Ukraine. So what are we even talking about? I mean, then I
Yeah.
mean, anyway, and then he says, though Merz had previously accused Russia of committing war crimes, he had never before directly called Putin himself a war criminal. Merz, a Christian Democrat who had been chancellor since May, is seen more hawkish on Russia than his Social Democrat predecessor and announced an end to the restriction on the use of long-range weapons being supplied to Kiev by Berlin and its allies in his first month in office. But I don't think that doesn't apply to the Taurus. I think that's still not. They haven't lifted the restrictions on the
Well, I
Taurus.
mean, they tried to finagle it by assembling them
Yeah, yeah,
and they were destroyed. So good luck with that one. That was a risk that
right,
nobody in their right mind would say, oh yeah, we'll just send the parts there and you can assemble.
right, right.
Yeah, the Russians watched all of it coming in. Then when the critical mass, when they start assembling, they destroyed the plants. I mean, yeah.
Right, yeah. And then he says here, Rutte to Putin, butt out over Western forces,
Oh, wow, wow, wow. Shaking in my boots. Yeah.
butt out. Um,
Rudy Fruity. Yeah.
that's right. And then he says,
Oh,
it's
George, just go back. Here we go again, everyone. George and I should start tracking this. the NATO chief praised Donald
Yeah,
Trump.
that's right. Exactly. You have to book exactly. You have to every time you open your mouth, first things out of your mouth is say, and all and God bless Donald Trump.
Well, you remember
May all the
when
blessings of the world be bestowed on Donald Trump.
remember when Trump made them stand outside the office like for
Yes,
45 minutes, like delinquent children? I'm sure what they were whispering to each other, except for Maloney, because Maloney doesn't like any of them. He said,
right.
just be polite.
That's it. Oh,
Just be
exactly.
polite.
Yeah, that's
Just
right.
be
Yeah, yeah,
polite.
yes, that's right. Yeah. Um, and it's not up to Russia to decide if Western troops can be sent to Ukraine as part of any peace deal ending the war.
Yes, it is up to Russia. Russia can decide that.
Well,
It is
exactly.
deciding
That's what
that.
he's doing right now. Yeah. Why are we interested in what Russia thinks about Ukraine? Well, I don't know. We've kind of, it's not that's not a hard question to answer. Ukraine is a sovereign country. It's not up to Russia what Ukraine will decide.
Just like Cuba.
That's right, exactly. Finland didn't ask Russia for approval to join NATO. We are sovereign nations, and if Ukraine wants security forces to support peace, it's up to them.
Well, he's
Okay,
just
then you really have to say, okay, Mark Rutte, you know, get your gun, get your backpack, and off you go. Just go then, go send the forces. Since it's not up to Russia to decide whether they're going to be there or
well,
not,
I would say
let's
to
send them in.
Rudy there, why do you think the war is happening in Ukraine?
Exactly.
Why do you
Um,
think it's happening?
that's right. That's right. And then said he also said that the U.S. will be able to provide for a mission to Ukraine, although he's ruled out sending American troops. Trump knows that Ukraine needs real security guarantees, and he's doing this not repeating Budapest, not repeating Minsk, and so he knows all of this. I mean,
Oh, here we go again. Here we go again. 1994 Budapest Memorandum that saw Ukraine give up its nuclear weapons.
that's right. Yeah.
Here we go
Yes.
again. Okay.
Um, and then we had this joint press conference. So he was Rutte. He was meeting the Prime Minister of Czechia, and then he says here at some point, um, Russia's investing 40% of its state budget in defense. And of course, you sometimes here and there have a nice parade, but that's not why they're investing all that money. They are investing it because they want to be successful in Ukraine, and we have to prevent them from being successful. But beyond Ukraine, it will not stop.
Here we go again.
And we have seen recent announcements and comments by senior military and also intelligence leaders in Europe saying that Russia might be ready by 27, by 29, some are saying 2030, 2031, to really, if they choose so, try to attack NATO territory. Um, well, if that's the case, I mean, then I really not sure that it's such a great idea to just put your forces into Ukraine. I mean, it's like if that's what Russia's doing, if you're saying, well, look, they're spending 40% of its state budget on that, and they have this huge plan to take over Europe. Well, maybe you want to just go easy and try to work something out. I mean, none of this ever really makes sense. I mean, on the one hand, it seems quite easy. Well, we're just going to bring Russia to its knees. We're going to bring them to the negotiating table. And the next minute, well, they're going to unleash their forces and attack NATO territory.
Well, if NATO forces, formally speaking, because they informally they're already there, enter Ukraine and start killing Russians, then NATO's at war with Russia. So what is the Russians supposed to do?
Right. That's
I
right.
mean, if there's a missile plant in Germany, then it will be destroyed.
Right. That's right.
That's called war.
Yes.
Because Western weapons are attacking Russian cities and
Right.
Russian factories and Russian energy infrastructure.
Yeah.
Well, maybe Russia will return the favor.
Yeah.
I
You would
mean,
think.
this is all a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right.
You're planning for war because you want war. Oh, why don't you plan for peace?
Because Rutte would be out of a job.
That's
His
right.
whole, his job is perpetually to be planning for a war. Um, and then the usual, deterrence and so on and so forth. And then we have the story today in the Washington Post that says, encouraged by Trump, Europeans agree to send troops to secure post-war Ukraine. Well, it's not encouraged by Trump. They just sort of they.
Okay, everyone, hold the show here, everybody. I don't know how many articles we're going to go through here. I notice there's a lot of slides in this presentation. George did his
We're
work.
coming. We're coming.
I'm not criticizing George. I'm actually going to compliment George. With all of these slides, where's Trump quoted? Where are his words?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm serious. I mean,
No,
everybody
that's
seems to
not.
know knows
No.
what he's thinking, but I don't know. Personally, how can I know? But I usually rely upon his words as reported
Right.
by his communications people. Well, I don't see it in these
No,
slides.
not at all. And that's been remarkable because he has said complimentary things about Putin. He said negative things about Putin, but we can at least quote them. We know where he said them. He says them on his Truth Social page. But all this stuff that he's going to back up Ukraine. He's going to provide them with air support and so on. There's no evidence for any of that. This is all somebody else repeating somebody else. Oh, yeah, he said this during the conversation. He said this to Zelensky or he said this to Stubb. But there's nowhere, you find me the Truth Social in which he said, yeah, we will provide air support to the
But even
Europeans
that
in
is
Ukraine.
vague.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Um, and so this is again the 26 nations that agreed to provide security guarantees. We've done it. We did it. We're providing the security guarantees. So this is really a happy day. Peace is at hand. Um, and then he says, even as they work to firm up plans for security guarantees, the Europeans can't quite agree on precisely what they're willing to do in Ukraine. So,
Wow, wow. Don't you feel completely deflated right now after all of
well,
this?
exactly. It's like,
And they can't quite agree. It's not really precise.
well,
Okay.
that's right. So suddenly, even the Washington Post is becoming a little skeptical about all these security guarantees and all these big meetings, the Coalition of the Willing and Macron and Starmer and Article 5, and saying, well, no one quite knows what they've actually agreed to do. They are calculating that in the long run, a ceasefire is inevitable, and that in the short term, a commitment to security guarantees would give President Zelensky the confidence of Western support if and when he enters into talks with Russia over potentially painful concession. I don't fully understand that sentence.
I don't either. And the way this is being framed, then why would the Russians talk to Zelensky? They should be talking to the
Right.
coalition of willing. But the
That's right.
coalition of willing doesn't want to talk to Putin because they call him a war criminal. I mean,
Right. Yeah.
and none of this is contingent upon what Zelensky has to
No,
say.
not exactly. Exactly. And there isn't going to be a meeting. I mean, why are we even talking
Oh,
about this meeting? There's no meeting planned. Um, but he says a ceasefire is inevitable. Why is it inevitable?
why is it inevitable?
And that in the short term, a commitment to security guarantees would give Ukrainian President Zelensky the confidence of Western support. But even if he gives him Western support, we also know the Russians are not going to accept Western security guarantees, in other words, a backdoor to NATO, if and when he enters into talks with Russia over potentially painful territorial concessions.
No, what again? See, this is how the framing is everything here over potentially painful territorial concessions. Well, I suppose for Zelensky, because he'll get lynched for it
Right.
in his own country. But Russia's not interested in this. It's
No.
interested in security.
Right. Right.
And I keep pounding away at this. And this is the narrative that George and I always confront because it's about territory. No, it's not about territory.
Um, and then the European approach calls for securing the skies above
Oh,
Ukraine and the Black Sea along its coast, and deploying a reassurance force on the ground. According to
Well, why
officials,
is it called reassurance? I mean, why not assurance force? I mean,
I, 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 I,
is this just a peculiar British thing?
I don't know. I mean, but it's yeah, reassurance. So you
I
feel.
mean, I'm sorry, I'm a simple guy, but I mean, when I hear reassurance, it's mean like there was assurance and you're
Yeah, I
compounding
think
and
so. I mean, a reassurance, exactly. A reassurance means that you're getting anxious, about something. Your parents might kick you out of the house, and so well, they reassure you, no, we're not about to kick you out of the house. So that's
oh,
like a
it's like the
reassurance.
dogs with the tip jar.
That's right. Just a reassure. Yeah, yeah, we still love you. We're not going to kick you out of the house. So that I think that's sort of reassurance as opposed to assurance.
Okay.
Um, and
It just doesn't roll off the tongue
no,
for
it
me.
doesn't. It's a nice distinction. According to officials with direct knowledge of the plans, that would include a demonstration element, troops based far from the front to serve as a disincentive against future attacks. But this is a peculiarity. They keep talking about this far from the front. If you're there and and you're not doing anything, essentially you're just hanging out, then obviously that's not going to reassure anyone. If, however, you're part of some integrated command who called upon to provide backup for Ukrainians, then obviously you become a military target. So you got to make up your mind which one you want to be. Either you're just hanging out doing nothing effective, or you're part of some kind of a reassurance force for Ukrainian forces, which is, I think, something very different. And then you do become a legitimate military target.
A demonstration element.
Yeah, I don't know what that is.
I don't understand. That means like we're going to jump the border and do this. Hey, we're in Ukraine. And there's nothing you can do about it. I mean, is
Right,
that what it is? Is this kind of like a theater event, you know?
right,
I mean,
right.
if it's a demonstration of what?
The problem that they have with that idea is that the Russians aren't going to trust NATO. Oh, we're just 5 feet across the border. Here we are. Oh, look at us. Okay, but knowing NATO, it's 5 feet today. Tomorrow it'll be 10 feet. Then the day after it'll be 15 feet. And then you're going to add some more forces. And you're going to just day after day, you're just going to keep moving further and further into Ukraine with more and more forces. So that's the point. They're not going to, Russians aren't stupid and going to say, oh, well, that's okay. It's just half a dozen Frenchmen 5 feet inside the border.
Yeah, but that will backfire on them. Say so, but the Russian military is continuing. What are you demonstrating?
Yeah, I
Weakness?
don't know.
It doesn't make
That's it.
any.
It doesn't make any sense because there's no ceasefire. I mean, they keep talking about the ceasefire. What ceasefire? Um, and then it goes on. French President Emmanuel Macron said Wednesday night that defense ministers had just completed extremely confidential, so confidential that I'm not even going to tell my wife about it. Um, Extremely confidential plans and confirmed contributions from their countries, which political leaders will now sign off on. We are ready, Macron said, standing alongside Zelensky at a news conference in Paris. Now, this is very interesting. He says it's very, very confidential. What about the respective parliaments in all of these countries? I mean, do they get a say in all of this, or does the public get a say in any of this? So the political leaders apparently will just sign off on it. Just this handful of leaders will just make a decision without any input at all from parliaments or the public.
Yeah, and Wednesday night, the defense ministers had just completed. What defense ministers was Pete Hegseth there?
I don't know. That's a yeah,
He wasn't there.
right.
He wasn't there.
Yeah, no, I don't know. Maybe he phoned in, but I don't know.
Maybe he won't. Okay.
It says we are ready, said Macron. We Europeans are ready to offer Ukraine security guarantees the day that peace is signed. This is
Okay, but I mean, somebody called him Micron. I think we should start calling him Micron now. Um, the French president Micron. Um, the day that peace is signed, I thought you wanted a ceasefire, or you
well,
want
that's
peace?
right. This is why it gets very confusing because why are we even talking about this? I mean, you
Well,
have
I mean,
all these
if there's
meetings
a
and all
peace,
these
but
talks
if
about
there,
yeah.
um, if there's, I'm sorry, if there's a peace, okay, let's try to conceptualize it. Okay, peace would mean that Russia and Ukraine are no longer in a state of hostilities, right?
Right,
Okay, that would be peace.
right, right.
So what do you need
But
reassurance?
that's exactly it. You see that in any if there's a peace, okay, as part of the peace negotiations, they'll say, well, we're going to have peacekeepers for whatever 6 months or 12 months, whatever, just to ascertain that both sides are keeping the peace. But that's something you decide upon during the latter stages of any negotiations. It's not something you start off talking
Hmm.
about before any negotiations. But they're not talking about peacekeepers. They're talking about security guarantees. So over and over again, that it's a sleight of hand where it seems like they're talking about peacekeepers, but in reality, they're talking about something very different, which is security guarantees, which could basically undermine any possibility of a peace agreement.
Exactly.
Um, and it says the question now is the sincerity of Russia. No, the question is your sincerity. That's what the question is.
Okay, all right, all right. I mean, this stuff just blows, my head's
No,
blowing.
it is. It's headachy.
Because if a peace is signed, you would assume, so you're assuming that that peace is signed out of with the lack of sincerity. So why would it be a
Yeah,
peace?
that's right. That's right. How can, they all say this? We don't trust Putin. So how are you going to sign an agreement? Someone that you already said you don't trust him.
Oh,
Um, and then he says, but while there is broad agreement on the need for security guarantees,
right. Okay. I mean, they're talking among themselves
that's right,
again.
broad agreement, exactly. The Europeans have struggled to hash out the concrete contributions of each capital, as some leaders sense political peril in putting soldiers' lives at risk. Political perils. So they're all that before there's a ceasefire, they're already talking about putting in these security guarantee, even though that undermines any possibility of a ceasefire. Now you get to the next problem, which is that countries are saying, "I'm not sure I want to send somebody in who might get his head blown off. I don't know whether politically I'd be able to cope with the fallout
Yeah.
if
Well,
Italian soldiers are suddenly get their heads blown off."
anyway, how could I'm not sure of Putin's sincerity, so we'll wait. Okay, you go ahead. I'll hold your beer. Okay. I mean, they create their own
Right.
linguistic traps.
It really is. It's their own language. Yeah. NATO is this is masterful NATO speak. But here's the political peril of putting soldiers' lives at risk. So why are you even talking about this?
Yeah, I mean, I thought we had peace.
That's right. I mean, since it is political peril, and there's no support for this. Why are you even doing this? Why are you even pushing for something that is very unpopular in your own countries, and there's no basis for it at all? I mean, there's no peace to keep.
No peace to keep.
Yeah.
Good.
Trump's openness unlocked a shift in tone from nations such as Germany that were reluctant to commit without US support. But Berlin has so far made no firm promises. No, there's been a lot
Again,
of
I'm looking for the Trump quote.
exactly. You're never going to get it. No, yeah, it's like it's always a link to something else, and then you read that something else, and that links to something else. You're never going to get it. France and Britain are willing to deploy forces, but politicians are contending with crucial questions, including how many troops could be mobilized and how they would respond to any Russian breach.
Wow, you can see they've really thought this one out.
exactly. You've thought this one through. And
What do we
then
do? What do we do?
that's right. Others in the coalition of some 30 nations are wary, including Germany, the Netherlands. Wow, if you don't even have the Netherlands, Sweden, Italy, and Spain.
I like the whole Spanish approach to it. Is it we're not interested. Leave us
Yeah,
alone.
yeah. With Eastern Europe fixated on its defenses and on keeping US troops in the neighborhood, Poland, for instance, says it can't spare forces but will supply equipment.
Yeah.
So we kind of we're always with these Baltic states, but there's a big problem with the Baltic states that just there aren't many of them living in the Baltic states. So that there isn't much manpower that you can draw upon when it comes to the Baltic states.
Well, I mean, George, one of the things that lurks in the back of my mind all the time is some kind of horrific false flag.
Yeah,
Uh,
no, no, all these things,
that
absolutely.
I'm always really
No,
worried
those
about.
things are absolutely, absolute a possibility. Um, and then here's a Wall Street Journal. Trump wants European troops in Ukraine. Europe's voters aren't convinced.
Well, no lies detected so far.
The public is wary of the push that some governments are making to deploy thousands of troops in Ukraine if a peace deal is reached. Notice how the public is wary of the push. Now, governments are supposed to be accountable to the people. I mean, it's like, well, the governments are going to do this, and the public aren't happy, but nobody really cares about what the public thinks. We're just going to go ahead and do it anyway. Um, I mean, it's supposedly it has to be kind of voters to whom governments are accountable, but apparently they just have these meetings and decide they're going to do this, this, and this, and then they think, yeah, but what about the people? I mean, there doesn't
Yeah,
seem to be much
also,
political support for this.
and a kind of a trivial thing, I suppose, but who's going to pay for this?
Well, that's definitely a consideration. Um, a plan. I mean, if they're going to start, let's say, introduce conscription,
Oh,
um,
gee.
that's a big deal because it's one thing, first of all, to introduce conscription. Questionable how popular that's going to be. No popular. But then you've got to train. You've got to train completely untrained uh, populace, young people who have absolutely no knowledge at all of any military matters. That's going to be a long time. When they used to have national service in the UK, at least people still remembered World War II. They had experience of World War II. The people you're going to bring into the army now have absolutely no experience. That's going to be it's going to take a long time to get them match fit and ready to be
Oh,
deployed.
match fit. I mean, how many of them can't even meet the bare minimum requirements
No,
when it
very
comes to,
almost, I'd say about 95%.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, so, a plan to send thousands of European troops into Ukraine if a peace deal is reached between Kiev and Moscow is running up against a key skeptic, the European public. But even that, the training that's involved, that's quite pricey. That's going to cost some
Yeah,
money.
I'm still just, if a peace deal is reached, then what do you need all of these soldiers for? God, I'd like to be in one of those rooms one day
That's
and
right.
just can you explain in simple words to me?
Right.
Because
Well, I
what are
think
you saying doesn't make any
no,
sense.
I think it's one of those things that they're planning a permanent military occupation. They won't admit it, but that's the plan. Essentially they're there not to keep the peace or provide security guarantees or anything like that. It's a permanent military occupation. And that's what they did in Bosnia. That was supposed to be a kind of a 1 year operation. The Bosnian military force that's still there. Kosovo, it's still there. So I remember even at the time in Kosovo, they said, "Oh, we need a 50,000 force, 50,000 man force in Kosovo." And I said, "Why? Why 50,000? I mean, it's a tiny province, and you need 50,000." Well, because it's permanent military occupation. I think that's the plan here. It has nothing to do with keeping the peace.
And
Um,
Ukraine is a really big place.
it's a very big, exactly. It's a very big. It's not like Kosovo. President Trump has recently warmed to the idea of the U.S. providing some form of security guarantees to Ukraine after France and the UK proposed. I mean, notice also how the Weasley words. They're not actually saying he has agreed to commit American forces. They said, or even American air power. He is warm to the idea of the U.S. providing some form of security guarantees.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, President Trump, is it possible you could warm up to ideas of providing U.S. Providing some form of security guarantees for Ukraine? Yeah, yeah. And behind me, they're redoing the Rose Garden. Have you seen that? Did you see that come in the door? Biden ruined it. He
That's right.
ruined it,
That's right.
okay? And then he
Exactly.
talks for 20 minutes about
Yeah.
his remodeling,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then
That's it.
the
Yeah.
publication like will say he's warming up to the idea when
Yeah.
he just wants to change this. We know what he
That's
does.
how he does it. That's what he always does. He just goes off and starts talking about stuff that he's talked about 150 million times before, which has no relevance to anything. But yeah, absolutely. You know what Melania has done to the rose garden. You know, look at those beautiful flowers that she's planted there. Um, and that's and then he'll go on about how Biden made a complete mess of Nord Stream. Um,
Which in these micro minds of the Europeans, they say he's warming. It means he's
he's
warming up.
warming up. That's right. So then it says, okay, some form of security guarantees to Ukraine after France and the UK proposed sending in a so-called reassurance force. So this is the thing of reassurance. Is obviously this is the new lingo. They've come up with a new coinage. You know, this has been invented sometime really in the past week or so. There's reassurance force. So we've gone from robust security guarantees. That was the buzzword 2 weeks ago. Now it's a reassurance force.
Yeah, yeah, again, I brought up the issue of psychology. You just have to think, okay, if it's a hybrid meeting, you have some people around the table, then you have the computer screens and all of that, and everyone's like, yeah, yeah, yeah. And then they break up and they go out of the room and like, where's that feeling? It's gone right now because it's all among it's
Right.
a self-help group
Yes.
and they're reinforcing the fantasies and the
Right.
illusions of the
Right.
person sitting next to you,
Right.
the
Right.
person on the screen. And then when you leave, you go back to the real world. Like, how are we
Yep.
going to pay for this? I mean, we're cutting social costs already. Conscription, I don't know anybody in this country that wants to go to war.
I,
We do have any money for it.
that's right.
What does Trump think?
That's,
Oh, yeah, he's warming up to it. Okay. I mean, it's like taking a pill, you
but
know.
it is, and it is
That's what it is. It's the reassurance force pill.
that's right. But of course, the point about Trump is really the salient one because it's ultimately everything just hangs on Trump. You know, hoping that Trump will be stupid enough to provide the guarantees, not to Ukraine, they don't care about Ukraine, provide the guarantees to them, to the British, the French, and the Italians. Yeah, if anything happens to you, we'll be there behind you and we're going to risk our lives for you. That's the security
Over the
guarantee.
last over the last few days, I think we're really getting the answer here. Trump would rather murder 11 guys on a little speedboat, and that's a win. That's a
That's
win.
the win, yeah. Yeah.
No one's gonna if they can try to roll him and saying this is going to be a win for you. I think Trump's saying I just prefer to blow up some more boats.
Yeah. That's exactly it. That's because that's what the United States has always been very good at. It's been very good at picking fights with small, virtually defenseless states that he can pummel into the ground at relatively little cost, financially or in terms of human losses. What the Americans generally, not always, but generally do is to avoid conflicts with equal size powers. That's what America doesn't do. You don't pick on anyone your own size. And so that's why, Russia, Trump knows instinctively. Now that's a whole other thing that we don't want to go down. Well, Biden didn't seem to know that, but Trump is shrewd enough to know, no, we're going to leave
Well,
that one alone.
this goes back to I think what George and I have confirmed our working thesis at the beginning of this podcast is that he's not going to close any doors, but he's not going to lead.
No,
Okay, not
no,
on this one.
no, that's right. No, this is what what he wants to do. Yeah, knock out all kinds of drug lords. We killed some
Ah,
more drug dealers the other day.
and he's going to get addicted to it.
Yeah,
Watch.
yeah, yeah, exactly. It's yes.
No, I'm dead serious. See, that's an instant gratification,
Yes,
instant.
yes,
Okay.
that's right.
Um, And I think that, the way it's being pitched by the White House to the MAGA base, they don't have a problem with any of this at
No,
all.
no one cares about Maduro. They think he's a communist. And then if you say on top of that, he's a drug lord, he's the master of the entire drug trafficking ring in the Western Hemisphere. Fantastic. Let's go get him. As long as you limit the casualties on the American side. That's when it gets difficult. But as long as it's a nice, easy one, you can just lob some rockets and missiles and kill a whole bunch of whatever
And,
Venezuelans,
and you don't
Colombians,
have to,
whoever.
and you don't have to deal with the pesky Europeans.
Yeah, exactly. um, and anyway, so it goes on. European leaders, however, are contending with the inconvenient fact that many voters are opposed to any deployment that places troops in harm's way. Well, that is a little inconvenient. Um, and then he says Eastern European countries don't want to divert forces away from their own borders, which form the eastern flank of NATO. Opposition is also fairly widespread in Italy and Germany, which is haunted by the legacy of World War II. I love the way they lob that in, as if somehow they're haunted by the legacy of World War II. It's absolutely nothing to do with the legacy of World War II. Germany was always very happy when during the Balkan Wars in the 90s, when they were pummeling Serbia, no one was saying, well, go, we have a bad memories of that because we really treated the Serbs badly in two world wars. It never came up. It has nothing to do with anything, but it's very flattering to the Italians and the Germans. Oh, yes, so they're haunted by the legacy. No, I think the Germans are smart enough to know we don't want to get ourselves into a nasty, a very serious war. And we're going to get ourselves killed. So it's nothing to do with World War II. Anyway, it says when German Chancellor Friedrich Merz recently said he planned to begin consulting Parliament about a possible military deployment in Ukraine, the reaction was guarded.
Guarded, guarded. Okay.
His own foreign minister
Can you imagine the guy writing this?
guarded. I love
About
this.
a possible military deployment in Ukraine. The reaction was,
What's the word? Yes,
what's the word? Okay, all right. Let's go neutral. Guarded. Okay.
guarded. But it's very funny because
You
it's
have
such.
to remember, when humans write this.
They write this, but of course it's a very lawyerly word. I mean, it's almost like somebody
Yeah.
writing a legal document, and with a legal document, everyone's going to go pouring over it. So you have to be very careful with the
Yeah.
word
Well,
you
and
use.
Al Capone was arrested for tax fraud. He was very guarded about
He was guarded. He was guarded. I was on my guard.
it.
His own foreign minister, Johann Vadeful, said such a deployment would stretch the Bundeswehr's capacity since it was already building an armored brigade in Lithuania to protect NATO's eastern.
All right, everybody, let's just take a look at that, okay? This is almost hysterical. You know, their deployment is being stretched because they're building a bridge.
No, exactly.
But the German army,
That's right.
the
My,
German army of 2025, it's being stretched
that's right.
because it's building one bridge
Yeah, one
in
brigade. But
Lithuania.
but that but the my recollection that it was a 3,000 man force that they were sending to Lithuania. That's just 3,000 men. I mean, that doesn't sound like you're stretching your capabilities. I mean, if 3,000 is a stretching your capabilities, it doesn't sound like you have much of a force. And what are they doing in Lithuania anyway? I mean, then other
They're building
political
a
leaders,
bridge.
yeah, that's right, yes. Other political leaders said the discussion was premature since there was no sign a peace deal was imminent. There was no
I'm
sign,
sorry, I should have said brigade,
yeah,
everyone.
brigade, yeah, brigade, yeah. There was no sign a peace deal was imminent. But this brigade, I think, is 3,000 men strong. I mean, it's not like, oh, we sent in a 100,000
Yeah, well, I
man
mean,
army into Lithuania.
3,000 strong can be evaporated in seconds.
Yeah, that's yeah. Because even when you send in 3,000 men, how many of them are in actual combat-ready forces? Very limited. A lot of
Yeah,
it is administrative, engineers, catering. The actual combat would probably only be about a third of that.
you don't
So,
want to put the cooks on the front line.
right, you don't want to, yeah, exactly. They're not, certainly not the cooks. You need food. Um, And then it says any troop deployment by Germany can only be decided by parliament where the government has a relatively small majority. Opposition parties on the far right and the far left are all virulently against dispatching troops to Ukraine. I always love this kind of
We have
language.
guarded and virulently. Guarded.
Well, exactly. We got virulent. And then you have far right and far left, and they're virulent. They're not just opposed to something, they're virulently
Yeah,
against.
a more objective way would say that they are principled on principle
Exactly. Yes.
against.
Yes.
See, whoever wrote this doesn't have the capacity to stand back and say, well, maybe it's this on principle.
Well,
You
you
know,
you would think they're elected. See, they're all elected representatives, so they are all answerable to their voters. So if they are virulently opposed to something, that would lead one to think that probably the people who vote for them are also virulently opposed to this kind of thing. Um, and the survey by the INSA polling firm last week showed 56% of respondents opposed a German contribution, a rise compared with the spring. But I always wonder when they say 56% oppose a German contribution, do they think, well, everyone else should go and do it, but I don't think the Germans should be involved. But yeah, but somebody else, yeah, you go right
yeah,
ahead
well,
and
it's
deploy in Ukraine.
also something of this importance, and it is so important. What was the question that was,
Oh yeah, no, that's never. It's not.
what
They
was the
never touch.
question that they were asked?
No, yeah.
Do you think under some circumstances, in some world, in some place in the universe, German troops should go? I mean, like that, okay?
Right.
Well,
No, that's right.
I mean, that's kind of vague. Why not? Okay. I mean, I've written questions for polls.
No,
Okay.
exactly. I mean, that's the easiest thing of all with polls is to get the result you want. You formulate the question, and then you get the answer that the pollster wants. And he says, even in France, one of the main proponents for putting boots on the ground, public support hinges on there being a final peace accord in place as opposed to a ceasefire.
So the public that these leaders look down upon so much, even they are in
Right.
agreement with George and I. Is that maybe we get a peace first,
Yeah,
okay?
let's get a peace first, not a ceasefire, a
But why
peace.
common sense?
Right,
The proles they're so snobbish around them, but
right,
these are the people. I mean, it's kind of like my brother would have to go there,
right.
or I might have
Uh,
to go there.
yeah, absolutely. I mean that's exactly what people are thinking. Yeah, my brother, my son. I'm not sure I want my son, being sent off to get killed in Ukraine. Um, but you see, what that reflects is how reckless and stupid and irresponsible this whole policy has been in Europe. Because it's clear that the Europeans and, of course, the Americans, they have no intention of sacrificing their own for Ukraine. And given that was obvious in 2022, then the responsible thing should have been to end this war ideally, obviously, not to have this war, but to end it as quickly as possible, because nobody is going to go in and put their lives on the line for Ukraine. And that should have been made clear to Ukraine from the beginning.
Right.
Um, and then a March survey by pollster Elabi found that 67% of respondents supported sending a French deployment if Kiev and Moscow reach a peace accord. Without one, 68% were opposed. So, yeah.
God.
So peace accord or ceasefire or whatever. And then European officials say it's hard to sell the public on any deployment without a clear statement from the US that European troops will have the backing of the world's most advanced military. And there we have it. We go back to the same point. No one's going to do anything, no one's going to agree to anything unless the Americans, out of stupidity, are ready to sacrifice their own for the sake of the Europeans. Well, of course they're not going to do it. I mean, and Trump hasn't said at any point that he was going to do it, that he was going to, get Americans involved in a way that they risk any American lives in all of this. Or,
If anything, Trump should act out on his own words.
right,
This was a catastrophe that the Biden administration
right,
created. He should not have put his fingerprints
right,
on it all.
right. That's right. That's right.
And considering the criticism he's getting for Gaza, for Iran, and all
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
this is something that could, everybody, Ukraine was key to his reelection
Right.
campaign.
Yeah, yeah,
Key.
yeah.
And it's within his reach. And now, oh, he'll take a political hit for it. He takes political hits every day.
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay?
None of it really matters to him in any case, because he's not seeking re-election. So he's not under the pressure of, well, I'm seeking re-election, and so. But of course, even then, if you're seeking re-election, you're going to get hit worse for seeking an end to the war, or you're going to get hit worse for continuing the war.
Exactly.
Yeah,
It probably, George, it's probably an equal measure.
exactly. Yeah. Despite a spate of frenzied diplomacy in the past few weeks,
No, there has been no
no,
diplomacy.
none at all. There's still no clarity on what the US would be willing to provide. But there's no clarity on what the hell the Europeans are doing. I mean, they have these meetings. Where's the clarity? So they say, it's the European, the no clarity on what the US is willing to provide. There's no clarity on anything. I mean, you have these coalition of the willing. What have they agreed on? If there's a peace in Ukraine, we will send forces into Ukraine. What does that even mean? There's no peace in Ukraine. So what are we even talking about?
And if there was a peace in a nominal way that we would all agree, then why would you need to send forces at all?
Exactly. Anyway, many European leaders say deploying troops in Ukraine is vital to Europe's security. That's what they say. Yeah, they do say that. But it means nothing, since they're not really prepared to put troops in harm's way, warning that Russia will march on other parts of Europe if Kiev falls.
Well, after 3.5 years, they haven't even marched on Kiev.
They haven't marched on Kiev, and if you really believe this, that Russia will march on Europe, why are you having such difficulties getting just putting a few boots on the ground in Ukraine? I mean, that's what all these stories are about. There's no
I
public support, for putting even the minimum of boots on the ground.
when I on my program when we would talk about European security, would always get not anymore because of the last 3.5 years. They get some kind of charlatan policy wonk from some think tank in the United States. That used to happen. And they would, but Russia threatens Europe. And I said, well, then why don't
Yep.
NATO members spend more on their defense if they're
Right,
so afraid of Russia?
right,
They
right.
could never give me an answer.
No, they never can. No, that's right. Um, And then these arguments find majority support in parts of Europe, particularly northern countries. The Netherlands, Denmark, and Estonia have said they were ready to contribute troops. Well, I don't know. I mean, we just read a story where they said the Netherlands wasn't ready to send troops. So, um, and
Yeah, but
then
okay, send troops. What? 10,
I, you know,
15,
and
100?
contribute combat troops. What are they going to contribute? Or, yeah,
Latrine dude,
latrine duty, or exactly, or catering corps, or whatever. So, like, contribute troops. That doesn't mean anything. French President Emmanuel Macron has tried to reassure the public that any deployment would be stationed at airports and other key infrastructure far from any hot zones.
why do they have to be at airports and
Yeah,
infrastructure?
I don't know. You're far from any hot zones. Macron and other
Oh,
yeah, I don't know
I
what
can hang out at the airport cafe. I mean,
I know. It sounds, to be honest, like it's the quickest way we can scarp from Ukraine if
yeah,
the going gets hot. Hey,
guard,
there's a plane on the tarmac. We're out of here.
guarding duty free.
I don't know. Um, and Macron and other European leaders have long said that frontline defenses should be left to a well-armed Ukrainian military. The objective of these reassurance forces is not to be guarantors of peacekeeping operations. They are not going to hold the border, Macron said, adding the French forces would provide strategic support.
Whatever that means.
It means nothing. I mean, remember, well, we've got to come a long way from Macron's big talk from, was it 18 months ago?
They're not going to hold the border.
Well, no, no,
And
not going to
French
hold the border.
forces
We're
would
going to be
provide.
hanging
No,
out
no,
at
no.
the.
They're not going to guard the border. They're
No,
not going to wear uniforms. They're not going to have guns. They're not going
no,
to have all
exactly.
of this.
Definitely not wear uniforms. Hey, we could be sitting ducks if we were wearing uniforms.
Exactly. No flags. No flags.
No flags. Yeah. Um, Britain's involvement also remains caveated. Prime
What
Minister
are you
Keir
talking?
Starmer
Do you
has.
ever say that, George?
I've never heard
I've
that
never. That
use
did. I
that
don't.
that used
Nobody.
caveated as an adjective.
I've
Or
never used that word as
yeah,
an adjective.
yeah. Um, Prime Minister Keir Starmer said,
Don't say that to Trump. He might think you're swearing at him.
yes,
Okay.
caveated. This is
Are you caveating me?
don't caveat me. Prime Minister Keir Starmer said that such a security force would only be deployed if the US promises to provide a backstop. That's right. That would provide military assistance to its troops should they come under attack. The majority of the British public are, according to polls, happy for their military to be involved in any peacekeeping mission, but wouldn't want to provoke a direct confrontation with Russia.
Well, we all ought to have a focus group and talk about what that last fragment of the sentence would be.
Exactly.
Well,
Starmer,
no, considering how propagandized
right.
the British public is, I'm not surprised.
That's right. That's right. Starmer's government has remained mute on whether British troops in Ukraine would be allowed to fire at Russian soldiers should Ukraine be reinvaded. Yeah, they want to be.
No, our troops do not have the right of self-defense. Okay,
That's right.
I mean,
Yeah. So, so the gravamen, I think, of these stories that we looked at is that you have once again this coalition of the willing talking among themselves
not
and
willing to
having
do
no
much.
idea at all what the hell they're talking about and what the hell they're doing.
Not
They keep
willing to do much,
not willing
George.
to do much, and they keep looking to Trump, hoping that Trump is going to just basically help them out. He's just going to pull their
Oh,
chest.
I think Micron is on the phone. No, 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 no. I show that film of that boat we destroyed. I want to see that again.
Yeah,
That's how Trump is going to be,
yes, right. Yeah,
unless he gets rolled. Okay, okay, and that's always a possibility.
it's a possibility.
And George and I always, our caveat here is do not dismiss the possibility of
Oh
escalation.
yeah,
It's
oh absolutely.
always here,
That's,
always.
I agree. I absolutely agree. Things could go very wrong. I mean, you mentioned about the possibility of a false flag attack, and yeah, Trump made escalate. I mean, he may just out of frustration.
Remember the ducks, the dead ducks,
The dead ducks, yeah, exactly. At the
and
time of the
then
Skripals,
and then Syria, the
right.
sarin attack. Okay,
That's right. Now, in the past, when he's escalated, he's kind of limited his escalation. But who knows? It's a dangerous game to play. You can't assume that, oh, he knew when to step off before, he'll know when to step off next time. So that's always, as long as the war goes on, there's always this danger of all sorts of unfortunate things happening.
I wonder at what point Maloney does the rolls her eyes and say, guys, I'm willing out, I'm willing this out,
But I don't. But she's gone along with everything. I mean,
Yeah, she has, yeah.
and she's the one who came up with this idiotic idea of an
Where did
article.
that go? Where did that go?
Yeah, the
That fell
article.
off a
Yeah,
cliff.
yeah, yeah.
That fell
Uh,
off a cliff.
that's right. That's right. Um, but this just goes on and on and on through this dint of inertia, and I'm sure they've already arranged yet another meeting of the coalition of the willing, probably wherever, probably in London next time or in Berlin, and they'll go through this motion yet again. So I think the clear message here is that NATO has played, I think, a deeply dishonest and a deeply dangerous game for the reasons that we spelled out, which is that if you're not willing to sacrifice your own people, and you obviously are not willing to sacrifice your own people for Ukraine, then you should have made that clear on day one and sued for peace on day one. And instead of continuing with this exercise and suggesting to Zelensky and whomever that maybe we might just come in on your behalf.
And George, that's going to be, however this works out. George and I have refused to go to the last legism
Right.
argument or
Yep.
put a date or any on this. But there's going to be an enormous amount of finger pointing as to
Right.
how the hell did this all happen?
Yep. Right.
When George's argument, are we willing to sacrifice our own people? No, let's shut this thing down.
Right. Exactly. That's
All right,
exactly.
everybody, I got to run.
Yeah.
This is the Gaggle with Peter and George. We're on local, so please go to thegaggle.locals.com. This is Friday. George and I will be reconvening on Sunday, live stream 10 o'clock Eastern time on Monday.
Okay.
And Buddy is, I mean, he's hyper excited about you mentioning the tip jar.
The tip jar, exactly, because it says, yeah, the Macrons of this world come and go, but the tip jar is forever. And one thing that is also seems to be forever, Buddy argues, is the dismal low level of the tip jar. So Buddy getting very angry, very frustrated, and he's taking out his frustration on me. And so if you have anything, any money lying around doing nothing very useful, pick it all up, both hands straight into the tip jar. We're very grateful for all of your help, friendship, and support. The more you're able to donate, the more of these videos we can make, the more we can improve on the technology. And we're going to somehow appease Buddy. It's really hard. I mean, he's very unappeasable. So remember, if you like the gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye-bye.